Welcome back. Slowly but surely, the CARICOM travel bubble is dismantling, seemingly unavoidably so. St. Vincent and the Grenadines and Grenada pulled out in October, and Barbados will now require mandatory testing for travelers from all destinations. Initially, the bubble allowed qualifying CARICOM countries to forego COVID-19 testing and mandatory quarantine. Travelers within the CARICOM bubble will soon have to present a negative PCR test result in the countries they are visiting. This is among the revised recommendations for the bubble from the Caribbean Public Health Agency, CARPHA.
In response to the second wave of COVID-19, which has seen surges in cases in many parts of the world, the CARICOM travel bubble is being re-envisioned. CARICOM countries that were eligible to participate in the bubble were Antigua and Barbuda, Barbados, Dominica, Grenada, Montserrat, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. In October, St. Vincent and Grenada pulled out of the bubble. St. Lucia has revised its bubble on at least 2 occasions. Now Barbados's Prime Minister Mia Mottley has made it clear that pre-testing is a requirement for all countries, whether low or high risk. Last week saw St. Lucia move from low risk to medium risk in Barbados's ranking.
Because of the fact that we have seen community spread in some of our neighboring territories, we are going to require from now on, and the Ministry of Health will announce the date from which it will start, that all persons coming into Barbados, regardless of whether it is from the high-risk countries of the US and the UK and Canada now, or whether it is medium or low risk, as long as this second wave is about and knocking down people in the world, in the Western Hemisphere with whom we have airline contact, we will require all persons to have a PCR test before entering Barbados or to get one at the airport upon entry.
Public Relations Manager of the St. Lucia Tourism Authority, Jermaine Georges, says the decision by any one jurisdiction to safeguard its population is understandable.
St. Lucia was the first country to enforce stricter measures outside of what the CARICOM bubble countries were requiring, in that incoming travelers are required to pre-test within 7 days of arrival and be exempted from quarantine if a negative test is produced. We also note the number of cases in sister countries and will ensure that pre-testing remains an entry requirement, along with the pre-filling of the travel registration form on www.stlucia.org/COVID-19. Grenada has opted out of the bubble. St. Lucia's approved bubble has reduced significantly over the last few months because of community spread noted in other islands, and so it continues to be a fluid situation and a health crisis.
Tourism Minister Dominic Fede has indicated that the new bubble restrictions will not have a significant impact on St. Lucia, given that the island did not have many flights from the Caribbean to begin with. Martinique and Trinidad and Tobago have been the island's main source markets within the region, and both countries have had to reinstitute lockdowns.
The 6th meeting of the OECS Council of Ministers for Human and Social Development was held virtually on the 20th of October against the backdrop of the global COVID-19 pandemic. The Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, ECCB, revealed that economic activity in the Eastern Caribbean Economic Union is projected to contract between 5.0% and 7.0% in 2020, accompanied by a sharp rise in unemployment. Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, a growth rate of 3.3% was forecasted for the OECS region. The meeting was held under the theme "No One Left Behind, Empowering People and Building Resilient Communities." St. Lucia's Minister for Equity and Social Justice and incoming Council Chair, Leonard Montoute, highlighted the importance of the theme in light of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic.
The number of vulnerable persons has become very extensive, as people who were once self-sufficient are now on the breadline seeking public assistance. And from my research, there are various factors that serve as the key to understanding who is left behind and why. The 5 most prominent ones are discrimination, place of residence, socioeconomic status, governance, and vulnerability to shocks. From our vantage point as small island developing states, we can identify with all of these factors. For many of us, the year 2020 may be considered the most challenging time in the post-9/11 era. This, coupled with COVID-19, our societies are plagued with a malaise of problems such as climate change, economic downturns, crime and violence, and a decaying social fabric. And so, in my view, if ever there was a time to turn our focus on building resilient and sustainable communities, it is now.
That was Minister for Equity and Social Justice, Leonard Montoute. The National Competitiveness and Productivity Council is seeking public comment and feedback on two pieces of draft legislation expected to have a direct positive impact on the private and productive sectors of the economy. The two draft pieces of legislation in question are the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Bill and the Security Interest in Movable Property Bill, both of which are currently available on the Government of St. Lucia website.
Pillar 4 of the St. Lucia Economic Recovery and Resilience Plan is geared at building resilience of the private and productive sectors of the economy. Policy Intervention Number 24, outlined under this pillar, seeks to support the business environment by fast-tracking legislation to increase access to finance by MSMEs. Shama Mathre is the economist with the National Competitiveness and Productivity Council, NCPC, the agency spearheading the legislative reforms.
Currently, we're in the process of finalizing the Security Interest in Movable Property Bill, and this is essentially a piece of legislation which enables the use of movable assets as collateral in order to access financing from banks. We're also in the process of finalizing another bill, which is the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Bill, and this is a piece of legislation which basically works with businesses and individuals who have fallen into economic crisis by giving them a chance at reorganizing or rehabilitating their debt so as to meet their financial obligations to the bank. Now, the latter reform and piece of legislation is a significant one for the financial sector as well as the economy as a whole.
The bills are expected to generate greater confidence among MSMEs in accessing finance for business expansion, exports, and employment generation, while providing security and redress to financial institutions transacting business with MSMEs. She added that the drafting process has been very meticulous and involved extensive stakeholder consultation via a steering committee comprising representation from the Bar Association, Bankers Association, various private sector associations, key agencies and government ministries, as well as civil society organizations.
We also worked with the World Bank Secure Transactions Legal Specialists as well as the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Legal Specialists, and those persons have a wealth of knowledge and experience in terms of drafting those types of legislation and even implementing these reforms in other jurisdictions around the world. And of course, they took into consideration our local context.
Mathran pointed out that the bills are very comprehensive in nature and have sought to address many gray areas and varying concerns. However, before the bills are enacted into law, the public is invited to comment on the draft pieces of legislation and provide feedback before the bills are finalized.
We at the NCPC and the Department of Finance and other key stakeholders are looking forward to the completion of the bills, but I think more importantly to the implementation of the wider reforms and those reforms actually translating to private sector expansion, exports, and of course contributing to economic growth in our wider economy. So we look forward to your contribution, your input, and your feedback.
The draft Bankruptcy and Insolvency Bill and the Security Interest in Movable Assets Bill are available to the public on the Government of St. Lucia portal, govt.lc, and the Ministry of Finance's website, finance.gov.lc. The NCPC also aims to increase its public sensitization campaign around these two pieces of legislation. For the National Competitiveness and Productivity Council, Glenn Simon reporting.
Stay with us. Sports and weather are coming up after the break.